My name is Martha Grover. I'm the Sustainability Manager in the Office of Planning and Community Development. And on behalf of the City of Melrose, I want to welcome all of you to this HeatSMART webinar. Before we get started, I also want to first thank the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center for selecting Melrose to participate in this program, and to Cadmus for their technical assistance throughout the program. And most importantly, thank you to Susan Murphy, our volunteer HeatSMART coach, and the rest of the Melrose Energy Commission volunteers who are working on this initiative with us. So before I turn it over to Susan and to Jeremy, I want to go over just a few housekeeping items. The meeting is being recorded and will be available on the HeatSMART Melrose website and on Facebook afterwards. You can use the chat box to communicate with me or with the panelists. Use the Q&A function to ask questions of the presenters, which will be answered after the presentations are concluded. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking and not already muted by me. So I think when we open up the Q&A, I'll unmute everyone and then ask everyone to mute yourself so we can reduce the background noise. I'm realizing I now have my background. So Susan, it's yours.
All right, thank you very much. As Martha said, I'm Susan Murphy. I volunteered to be the HeatSMART coach for this program. This is Jeremy Koo of Cadmus is going to tell you a lot more about the program, but I'll just briefly note that this is a program that Mass EC has been running for a number of years. We're really excited to be a part of it and to have the opportunity to spread information and to give the opportunity to work with some vetted installers of the technologies that we've chosen, which are air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, and solar hot water. We on the Energy Commission are really excited about seeing people have more knowledge about what these technologies can do. You know, we've talked to people, as various events, Victorian Fair and such, and we know people need to know, like, what's the latest technology, know that this is an option, have an idea of what might be something that they could use in their home. So the way this is going to go forward is Jeremy is going to present a little bit about the program itself, and more importantly, sort of a 101 on each of the technologies. And we also are very excited to have residents here who have these systems already in their homes who are going to be able to tell us about their experience with them. And then there'll be an opportunity to ask questions both of Jeremy and of each of the presenters. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jeremy, and if you can make him a presenter so he can do his slides. Can you do it?
No, I'm not able to, yes.
Hold on.
While Martha's doing that, I'll just note that this was a program that was originally scheduled to be live on March 25th. So it had the honor of being one of the first things that was canceled when all these shutdowns occurred. So took a couple of months to get back on track with this program, but it's all moving ahead. And we're glad to be able to be here.
I think
There we go.
there we go. Did it. This is my first time doing this, so bear with me.
No
Thank you,
worries.
Martha. I'm going to mute myself now.
So am I.
Great. Hi everyone, and thank you for taking some time out of your evening to join us today. My name is Jeremy Koo. I'm a consultant with Cadmus. Cadmus is a consulting firm that is providing support to the HeatSMART Melrose team and to the broader HeatSMART Mass program. I'll be providing some additional introductions to the program in general, and talking about HeatSMART more broadly, why the state is investing in communities like Melrose to promote clean heating and cooling technologies. I'll give an overview of the technologies that the Melrose team has included in their program. And then I'll turn it over to a couple of residents from Melrose who will speak to their experiences as folks who have adopted some of these technologies. The HeatSMART team is there's a lot of folks that are involved in making HeatSMART Melrose a reality. Of course, Susan Murphy as the lead coach and volunteer for the Melrose community with support from Martha at the city. They'll also be joined by a number of volunteers. In particular, we wanted to thank Lori Timmerman, Sanis, and Gary Lamoth for their support thus far and moving forward in the program. HeatSMART Mass in general is a program that is jointly funded by the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and Department of Energy Resources. Jacqueline Guile is on the webinar and may take some questions later on. I'm joined by my colleague Sarah Terrell, who is also part of the technical team that's supporting the HeatSMART Melrose team. Feel free after this presentation to visit us at heatsmartmelrose.org to learn more about the program and some of these technologies, as well as if you have any questions or would like to get involved in supporting the program, reach the HeatSMART Melrose team at heatsmartmelrose@gmail.com. So HeatSMART Mass in general involves a number of players that I just mentioned. Mass CEC and DOE are funding the program and providing support by, we both working providing support to the team directly and enlisting the support from me and my team to support the folks not only at Melrose but also in other communities throughout the state. But ultimately, HeatSMART Melrose and the rest of the HeatSMART Mass programs are really driven by community organizers, volunteers, and the municipalities in which they live. Stay tuned in the future. We will be also importantly selecting a number of installers to support the program and provide after a competitive vetting process services to Melrose residents at special HeatSMART prices. Melrose joins a suite of communities that have already participated in the program, which include in our pilot round, Carlisle, Concord, Lincoln, Bolton, Harvard, Great Barrington, Nantucket. In the most recent round, Arlington, Winchester, Belmont, Hudson, Stowe, and Marshfield. And in this round in 2020, Melrose will also be joined by Newton. So HeatSMART, I don't know how many of you recall the Solarize Mass program, but similarly, we hope to see over the coming years HeatSMART spread across the state in the same way that Solarize has. So in general, the primary goal of the HeatSMART Mass program is to increase the awareness across communities in Massachusetts and the adoption of clean heating and cooling technologies. On the first two rounds of HeatSMART, we had over 1,800 residents participate, with over 1,200 homes visited by the selected installers and over 430 clean heating and cooling systems installed, which will save residents money and also help the state in achieving its greenhouse gas emissions targets. HeatSMART Melrose, this is our official community kickoff event with the first webinar. As Susan mentioned, unfortunately, this was slated to be an in-person event back in March, but we are working with the challenges of the time. We hope in mid-June to have the installers selected and announced for HeatSMART Melrose and begin enrolling folks. Hopefully, as the state's plan for reopening progresses, we can begin starting with both remote and eventually, hopefully, in-person assessments to see what clean heating and cooling solutions will be the best fit for your home and your needs. Depending on how things progress as well, we may or may not be able to have in-person campaign events, but expect to have additional online webinars, videos, conversations with folks involved in the Melrose program throughout the course of the campaign. We expect for the sign-up period to go through more or less the rest of this year, and folks who do sign up and get proposals from our installers will have a deadline of mid-February of next year to decide to move forward. These timelines, of course, are subject to change, as pretty much everything is at the moment. So don't consider these to be set in stone. There is some flexibility depending on how the year progresses. So I think overall, why it's an important question to just ask, why clean heating and cooling. The state has under the Global Warming Solutions Act, passed over a decade ago, has set targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by this year and 80% by 2050. So you can see from the chart on the left, space and water heating are a crucial proportion of the emissions from the state, such that if we want to reach 80 by 50, reducing those loads, while important, is not quite enough to get there. We'll also have to switch out the primarily fossil fuel heating that we use for both space and water heating with clean heating and cooling technologies. Fortunately, there are a number of benefits that come with clean heating and cooling systems. Many of these technologies are cutting edge and offer superior quality and comfort relative to technologies that have have languished by comparison. For many folks, they will be able to see some decreased operational costs and saving energy and money. And above all, the reason why the state is supporting this is for the potential to reduce the state's greenhouse gas emissions towards meeting its legal target of 80 by 50. Additionally, you may ask the question simply, how much are we talking about in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions? When you look at this chart, I think for many years, natural gas has been promoted as a cleaner alternative to dirtier fuels like heating oil and propane. And that certainly is the case with a significant proportion of the emissions reductions that have been achieved by the state to date, having come from switching from fuels like oil to gas. However, to get all the way to our long-term targets, we'll need to switch to clean heat and cooling technologies, many of which are powered by electricity. So looking at air and ground source heat pumps, even under today's grid conditions, where the grid is still powered by a lot of fossil fuel generation, we could see that these technologies offer, at minimum, 40% reduction from gas today, with those emissions expected to continue to decrease over time as we install more renewable electricity, as the state is legally mandated to do. So while gas has provided a bridge solution to date, these systems will be needed to be able to get us all the way to our long-term goals. There are a number of clean heating and cooling technologies that are available that the Melrose team will be offering through the program. There are air and ground source heat pumps, solar hot water, and a fourth that the state supports as well, which is modern wood heating, though this will not be included through the Melrose program. Though certainly, if you are interested, I encourage you to visit masscec.com to learn more about what programs are available to support modern wood heating. Jumping into these technologies, starting with air source heat pumps. Air source heat pumps are an electric-powered heating and cooling system that transfers heat in and out of a building. Heat pump, if you're unfamiliar with it, is really best thought of as an air conditioner that can run in reverse. A heat pump uses a refrigerant cycle to transfer heat from one space to another, much like a refrigerator or an air conditioner does. And by doing so, in using the electricity to power heat transfer rather than actually generating heat, these systems are able to achieve efficiencies that are significantly higher than if you were using electricity to generate heat. So an air source heat pump can achieve efficiencies of 2 to 3 times more efficient than electric resistance. And additionally, these systems, again, as in some ways, air conditioners that can run both forwards and backwards, also provide high efficiency cooling in addition to the heating, which is a significant benefit of the technology. Picture on the left, you can see what typically an air source heat pump has: an outdoor unit, as you can see on the far left, which exchanges heat with the outdoor air, whether it's rejecting or moving heat from inside to outside to provide cooling, or extracting heat from the outdoor air to move that heat indoors through an indoor unit like the one that is pictured. Air source heat pumps offer a number of benefits. Energy savings, in particular against oil, propane, and electric resistance, can be achieved. In addition, air source heat pumps, in particular ductless air source heat pumps, are very popular in that they can provide quiet and efficient air conditioning and dehumidification, just like central air conditioners do. But these systems tend to run more continuously and more evenly, providing more regular comfort instead of an air conditioner turning on and turning off and letting the room heat up. The system, particularly the ductless solutions, offer a lot of flexible solutions for homes, whether you have ductwork for central air conditioning or not. As you can see pictured to the left, there are ductless wall units like the one at the top and on the previous page, but there are also floor units and ceiling units that can meet the needs of the space. These systems in general are what we would call zoned systems. So each individual indoor unit, like those pictured, provide heating and cooling to an individual zone within the room in the house, which can be a couple of rooms or an open space. That allows you to change the temperature of what's in the space in the home across different spaces, depending on the preference of people in the home. A number of smart controls as well. You can control any of these units from remote controls or from smartphone apps. Are also very popular options for addressing hot and cold spots. Maybe you have a room that has always been poorly heated or overheats in the summer, and it's difficult to expand the hot water piping you have or the ductwork into that space, and it can be cheaper to install a ductless unit there. Additionally, if you're planning a new addition, this can also be a great solution for just providing heating and cooling to that space without, again, needing a more costly and invasive retrofit to your ductwork or to your hydronic heating system. These costs vary depending on the size of the system, typically starting at around $4,000 for a single zone, depending on how many zones that you need in the home or whether you're installing a centrally ducted system. These are all costs before the incentives that are available from Mass Save, the utilities energy efficiency program. I do also want to reiterate there are both ductless and ducted options available. I think most folks who are familiar with heat pumps from from the south and from the southwest and the mid-Atlantic may be more familiar with centrally ducted systems like the one pictured at the bottom left, which doesn't look all that different from a central air conditioner, but those will connect to existing central ductwork, and ductless systems are also available. The other important thing I want to note is that conventionally, air source heat pumps have typically only worked well in warmer climates. When I told my mother that I was working a lot on heat pumps about 5 years ago, when I started working in the space, she said something like to the effect of, that thing we had back in Maryland that never worked and kept the house cold all the time. Fortunately, in the last decade, there have been a lot of technology advances, including cold climate air source heat pumps, which provide high efficiency to temperatures of 5 degrees and lower, and can keep providing heat as low as anywhere from -13 to -22. That's just air temperature, not including wind chill. So these systems are certified and tested by one of the the national regional energy efficiency organizations, the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships meet for their performance at those temperatures, and those will be the systems that will be primarily installed through the Melrose program so that they can provide efficient heating year-round. Ground source heat pumps are often referred to as well as geothermal heat pumps, are another heat pump technology that, as opposed to using the outdoor air to transfer heat with, they use the ground. The heat pump unit, which is inside the home, is connected to a ground loop, which is typically high density polyethylene tubing, which is buried underground. In Massachusetts, typically these are vertical boreholes that are around 300 feet in depth that are drilled somewhere on the property. The heat pump then runs water with some antifreeze in it through those pipes that are never exposed to the ground and have are expected to last for 50 to 100 years, so very low risk of any leakage into the environment. And heat that is transferred there is then extracted with the heat pump and distributed through the home, either through ductwork or through hot water distribution. A ground source heat pump system, because it uses the ground, which where 300 feet below is much more stable year-round in temperature than the outdoor air, is able to provide significantly higher efficiencies, which can be as high as 400%, 4 times more efficient than electric heating. So a ground source heat pump is the most efficient technology that is available for heating and cooling your home. They also, in addition to providing whole home heating and cooling, can also provide some or all of your hot water, depending on the system that's installed. As a result of that high efficiency, they offer the lowest operating costs for heating and cooling. Because it is a whole home solution, you are able to eliminate fossil fuels entirely by installing a ground source heat pump, whereas with air source, you can do so, but many choose to leave their fossil fuel system in place. The indoor components are expected to last around 25 years, and the outdoor components 50 to 100 years. Some manufacturers will provide warranties of approximately 55 years for no leaks. So high confidence from those manufacturers. Additionally, once the installation is complete, of course, during the installation and drilling process, there will be disruption to the property, but after the installation is complete, there's also no outdoor equipment that is exposed to the elements, so little risk of any damage there. Ground source heat pumps are more costly due to the drilling process, and so after the incentives, which include the federal 26% tax credit, these systems are typically started around 20 to 25,000 for a whole home heating and cooling solution. Most systems in Mass are installed with existing ductwork or new ductwork. This is because to provide cooling, they need ductwork in the same way that that an central air conditioner would. Ground source heat pumps may be able to connect to some existing hot water systems, particularly if you have radiant floor heating, but most radiators and baseboard heating will not be compatible. Ground source heat pumps also, they can have a dedicated standalone system for providing domestic hot water, or they can be installed with what's called a superheater, which uses the excess heat that's removed from the home during cooling to then be pushed into a hot water tank, which can provide you with free hot water for about 40 to 50% of your annual hot water needs. The last technology that HeatSMART Melrose is including in its program is solar hot water. Solar hot water, not to be confused with solar photovoltaics or solar electric, which uses sun to generate electricity. Solar hot water uses solar energy to directly heat your home's hot water. These collectors pictured on the left absorb heat from the sun, and which is transferred into a hot water tank inside of your home through a heat exchanger. This system circulates a glycol antifreeze through it to avoid any freeze damage while it continues to operate throughout the winter. And that hot water, that heated liquid transfers into your solar storage tank without being exposed to your domestic hot water. Over the course of the year, a properly sized solar hot water system will heat approximately 70% of your hot water at no cost beyond some electricity needed to operate the pumping system. Because it's using solar energy to directly heat water as opposed to relying on the photoelectric effect. It is more energy efficient on a per roof square footage basis, and you can see these, a 2 or 3 of these collectors can be sufficient for most single family homes and will take up less of your home than solar PV would. If you do have solar PV already, there may be some space still to fit a couple of collectors. Some installers also install solar hot water on kind of awning style mounts that kind of shade over the side of the home in a suitable area. These systems are low maintenance, reliable and long lasting. There are systems that were installed in the 70s that are still in operation. Typically, we'd expect the solar hot water collectors to last over 20 years on your roof. These systems provide immediate energy savings by just reducing the cost of your hot water bill, with obviously having more savings depending on how many people are in your home. Families of 4 with a lot of kids will see more energy savings than folks that live alone or with 2 people in the household. These systems also are primarily installed for providing domestic hot water, but they can also serve to preheat water to a boiler to reduce space heating costs, though typically you need a much larger system to do so. Additionally, if you have an outdoor pool, you can install pool heating systems that will help to reduce costs and also will depending on what the weather's like, extend the season for use of that pool. Solar hot water systems also benefit from federal tax credit and a number of incentives, and they start at about $3,000 after incentives. Last thing I'll note is that solar hot water systems can be installed in either 1-tank or 2-tank solutions. You can either keep your existing water heater if it's relatively new. If it's a 5-year-old water heater, there's nothing wrong with it. You can install a solar storage tank like the one pictured here that will just preheat the water that gets fed into that existing hot water heater, and you'll save energy that way. Alternatively, if your existing hot water heater is, around 10 years old, getting there might be at risk of failure in the next few years, you can replace that entirely, and this solar storage tank will have a backup electric resistance element included in there that will will bring the solar heated water up to the temperature needed to meet your home's needs. There are a number of incentives available because of the energy savings and emissions reduction potential. I won't go over these in detail. I encourage you to visit our website to learn more about the incentives that are available, as well as once you are beginning to work with the installers, we will select through this program. These folks will have all the information you need about the incentives available, and they will help you with applying for them. In general, there are incentives that are available from Mass Save, the state utility program, which can range as high as $5,000 or more, depending on what heating fuels you use for air source heat pumps, because the utilities have set a goal of installing over 62,000 cold climate air source heat pumps by the end of next year. There are also rebates from Mass CEC for whole home air source heat pump systems that are replacing gas systems, as well as for ground source and solar hot water systems. There are also incentives available from the Department of Energy Resources alternative energy certificates that can be sold on a quarterly auction, depending on the size of your home or the size of the system you're installing, to give you an additional incentive. Arguably one of the most important programs that are available to support residents in making these investments is the Mass Save Heat Loan Program. The heat loan is a 0% interest loan of up to $25,000 of terms of up to 7 years. It can be used to support not just the installation of any of these 3 clean heating and cooling technologies, but also any energy efficiency improvements like insulation, air sealing, weatherization that are identified by a home performance contractor that can further reduce your home energy consumption and improve your home's comfort. you only get one of these per utility customer. So certainly if you're considering making those improvements in conjunction, it is worth putting them all on the same heat loan so that you can finance all of that using these very attractive terms. The heat loans offered by, I believe, over 90 local banks and credit unions across the state. So you can find that information. You'll be able to find that information on the HeatSMART website to look at what what lenders are offering the heat loan. Additionally, for the Mass CEC's incentives for these three technologies, there are additional incentives that are available for people who are income eligible. This can include whether you are considered in these tiers of under 80% or between 80 to 120% of the state median income. In 2020, these can be higher than you may think. For a family of four, that's over $143,000. Making less than that would allow you to access a larger incentive from Mass CEC. So worth considering. You can verify your eligibility through an anonymous platform that's available on the CEC's website. So what can you do now? Well, obviously we're in a little bit of a hole right now in the state for contractors coming out to your home. What Mass Save has established is a virtual online home energy assessment process that you can find at masssave.com. Completing this virtual home energy assessment, you may need to take a few photos and send it over. They will create a home energy report for your home that will estimate your home energy bill, and what sort of energy savings you could see from a variety of improvements, such as insulation, air sealing, weatherization, and completing this assessment will enable you to be eligible for both the heat loan and Mass CEC's rebates. If you're able to and interested in completing efficiency upgrades prior to installing a clean heating and cooling system, Mass Save will also pay for over 75% of that. Massachusetts is #1 in the country according to American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, and these very, very strong incentives and financing programs available for residents throughout the Commonwealth are a big part of that. Once our installers are selected, you can then sign up on our website, heatsmartmelrose.org, to get a free site visit from any of the technologies you're interested in once we've selected the installers. With that, I'll turn it over to, I don't know who's our first customer testimonial.
Yeah, I'll step in here, Jeremy.
Okay.
This is Susan. So thank you, Jeremy. So that was great. I am going to turn it over to our residents, but I did want to, before I do that, note that we also have someone from Mass CEC here, Jacqueline Gould, who we really appreciate her presence here. And obviously Mass CEC is providing the funding and technical support for this program and has hired Cadmus to help us. So I have to thank Jacqueline for being here. So next we have 3 residents who will each have an opportunity to speak about their technologies. If you do have questions for Jeremy or for the residents as they're talking, feel free to write it into the Q&A. Or you can save it till the end and we'll unmute people. But if you put it in the Q&A, you won't forget it. So our first resident we're going to hear from is Will Condon. He has a solar hot water system, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how they came about to decide to do solar hot water and what their experience has been. So Martha, Will, are you there? Can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear us? No.
Yeah, they can hear you. Do you want to put yourself on screen, or would you rather not?
Okay.
You're muted now. Now I can hear you. I can hear you, but can't see you.
You're unmuted.
Can you hear you? We can hear you, but can't see you.
Unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Go to someone else.
Okay. All right. We'll come back to them. Steve Manuel, are you ready to speak? Steve Manuel has air source heat pumps. You game?
Yeah, it looks like I'm connected here.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. You ready to tell us a little bit about your system and your experience?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we installed basically two systems. Going back to what Jeremy described, one is essentially a central air source heat pump system, and the other is a little bit different. It's sort of a variation on one he described, and that is it's a so-called ducted mini split. So it has an outdoor unit that looks pretty much like a lot of the other rectangular units with the side draft fan, but then has a small indoor air handler with ducts going to two rooms. So that does the living room and dining room in our house, and the so-called central system is has a vertical flow outdoor unit similar to the photo Jeremy showed. And, kind of a typical central system air handler up in the attic, and then a duct trunk and individual ducts going to 5 different rooms. So the reason we used that was we had, a large number of rooms to supply to. So the reason we wanted to do all this was we had an old steam system in our 95-year-old house. It was fueled with heating oil, so we wanted to try to get away from using fossil fuel as much as possible for heating. So the two systems we installed, in fact, do heat the entire house. We haven't had to use the oil system at all, really. We used it a little bit when we first were starting up the heat pumps and getting used to them. But then the old steam system has been off for 2 winters in a row now. So the heat pumps have worked out well in that sense. They were sized to meet the loads for the whole house at the minimum winter temperatures, or the so-called design temperature. And so the other piece of this is we had previously installed solar panels, which made more electricity than what we were using for other things. So the solar is now able to supply basically all of our energy needs for heating and cooling, other electric things like lighting, with only leftover 1,000 kilowatt hours that we do buy from the utility in the winter. And then separately, we use a little bit of gas for the stove and for domestic hot water. So that's the basic system. We had been using about 500 gallons of heating oil, so we have no oil heating bill anymore, which is nice. And I guess the other background piece to it is we had done a number of other things to reduce the amount of heating load, and thereby both keep the size of the heat pump system under control, even though it's an old house. So we had replaced the storm windows, done a lot of air sealing, had insulation blown into the walls. And then the kind of the last thing that we did to get ready for the heat pump installation was to insulate the attic. In other words, the underside of the roof deck, so the attic became a semi-conditioned space to put the heat pumps in. So that was a better arrangement for the upstairs heat pump, and also made the rest of the attic more usable for storage, since it wasn't blazing hot in the summer and cold in the winter. So I think those are kind of the highlights of the system. I guess a few important things to do along the way are to make sure the contractor does heat load calculation, so the heat pumps are selected to meet the required amount of heating in cold weather, especially in this case where we wanted to have the heat pumps do all of the heating. And for our application with the ductwork, it was important to size the ducts so that they minimize the pressure drop, which makes them quieter and makes the fans use less energy. So those are a few thoughts on our process, and can answer more questions about it later if anyone has any.
Great, thank you so much, Steve. So Will, are you ready to, Will and Lisa?
Yep, can you hear us?
All right. Steve, why don't you mute yourself? Thank you very much. All right, so now we'll have Will and Lisa Condon. I could hear you.
Yeah, you can hear us.
I saw you earlier, I can't see you now.
Okay, I'm not sure why you can't see us, but.
Here, right now you can.
Now can you?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. You think after 2 months of doing all this stuff, we've been mainly on the Zoom.
There's always technical difficulties. All right, so Will and Lisa Condon will tell us about their solar hot water system. Thank you very much for being here.
Okay, great. So we installed it just about 2 years ago, almost. It was June of 2018. And we had wanted to do solar for a while and did not take part in the Solarized Mass, even though I actually worked at DOER at the time, because we had several people look. I think we had at least 2 or 3 companies look at the house, and we have big oak trees over it. And they just said that the economics didn't work in terms of having the right amount of sunlight to make it economically feasible. So we looked into the solar hot water once the alternative energy credits became available, and we took advantage of that and the heat loan and the tax credits and the whole thing. And Will has, he'll talk about the numbers, but just in general, we've been really, really pleased with it. We have it really, unless you have like probably 5 days of rain, it's really takes care of all of our hot water needs. We have 3 panels, which is a little bit oversized for our house. We have a 3-bedroom colonial, and we are mainly empty nesters, but we sized it a little bit bigger than we needed, just in case we ever sell the house to people with teenagers or something and needed a lot more hot water. And it has been basically we are able to turn the oil burner off in the spring and not turn it back on again until the fall, because we don't need it at all really for our hot water needs. So we've been happy with it.
Yeah, so when Lisa mentioned it takes care of all the hot water, that's from early to mid-May through September, because we have oil heat and the oil burner's running most of the winter anyway, so that provides the hot water for us at that time.
Well, basically how it works is I think it takes care of it until it can't, and then it will flip it automatically flips over to the oil burner. So yeah, I mean, and the process for getting it installed was pretty easy. I mean, it was very easy. It took some time because I'm not sure how many installers there are now. At the time we did it, I believe there was only one company that was installing the systems in our area, which was New England Hot Water down the South Shore. So there was a backlog, and the whole process probably took, I'd say, about 4 months, start to finish, before we actually got the thing installed and hooked up.
But it only takes a day. It takes about a day.
Yeah, once they finally did it, yep.
Yeah, so from an economic standpoint, you know, the proposal was for about $12,000. We ended up paying less than $2,000 after the credits and the incentives, rebates, and everything else that went along with it. What we found is that we're using about 100 gallons of fuel less each year. We were running about 750 gallons of oil per year over the past few years, and then we probably used about 50 gallons less the first year and 100 gallons this past year. So,
well, the first year was a half a year.
Right.
Yep.
So from that standpoint, you know, the savings there ends up being whatever 100 times whatever the gallon of oil is. But a huge benefit, and also a reason why we did this, is that, you know, our oil burner is running all year round, and during the summer it's hot. The basement would end up getting hot because the oil burner would kick on several times a day just to heat up the water tank, and so that was less comfortable. Now, you know, we just turn the oil burner off, and it's not on unless, as Lisa said, it's cloudy for a number of days, and so the basement remains cool, and the house is cooler. Yep. So there's less of a strain on our air conditioner upstairs as well, and it's more comfortable. You know, we do have living space in the basement, so it's much more comfortable there. Any questions on costs, installation?
Can we tell you anything else? Is that good?
I think that's great. Why don't we're going to hold all the questions till the end, and we'll come back to you if people have specific questions about your system. But thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, and so our last technology is ground source heat pumps, and we have Michael Rigney here, who has installed a ground source heat pump system a couple of years ago. So Michael, if you're all set, why don't you take it away?
Thanks. Can you hear me? Just a quick sound check.
Yes, can hear you.
Perfect. Great. Thanks. So we live in an older house, a Victorian. We moved in here in 2014. We did some insulation. And then a couple of years after that, because the house needed it, in a couple of years after that, the heating system, which was oil, started giving us trouble. We wanted to make the house as energy efficient as we could. So that was a big motivation for us. And so after doing some research, we got 2 quotes and ended up going with ground source heat pump. We do have an air conditioning system as well, and so there were ducts in the house. So ducts did not have to be added, which goes back to the comments at the beginning of the presentation. I think one point that I would make is that if people are aware of ground source heat pumps, they tend to think of them as a heating technology, and they're both. And so my point is that, and both in terms of the payback and when it might make sense to buy one, if you have an old central air conditioning system that you're faced with replacing, and then your heating system is going to have to be replaced in 5 years after that, that's a pretty good situation to really think about ground source heat pump, because while the technology is quite expensive, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, what I found when running the numbers was that as soon as we had to replace the old air conditioning system in our house, which was 2 separate units because of the way it was zoned, then I was probably going to break even. The house would break even at that point. So I think something just to really consider is that it does replace 2 systems, and so from a financial perspective, that's important. The supports are substantial, the cost is substantial, and the supports are substantial. Then there are really There were 3 at the time that we did it, and so maybe some of the other experts can talk about how that's changed. There's the federal tax credit, there is a rebate from the state, and then there's also some alternative energy credits which can be bought as well, which is just a little bit. And then the third major advantage was the loan, the 0% interest loan. And so those were the 3 big financial chunks, and they really decreased it over time. And made the project make a lot more sense. The other thing that I would say that really stood out to us is that it's incredibly quiet. It's just really, really nice because our air conditioning units were right outside our kitchen before. And so, even in the summer with the windows closed, when it was hot, you would still hear them when they were on. And it's just dead quiet because it's all, the units are inside the house, and then there's no need for a fan. What makes the noise is the fan. So that's fantastic. We have had to do some adjustments to get the system to work with our ducting and work with an older house. And I think if you were building your house from scratch, you probably wouldn't have some of those challenges. So that's just been part of the experience. The contractor has been pretty responsive and helped us through that. And now the system is much more dialed in, and so so that's great. So we're really happy with it from that perspective. Let's see. So that's most of it. So happy to take comments. Well, maybe the other thing I'll add is that we have little kids, and digging the holes was like the best thing ever. They just loved it. That was fantastic.
All right, thank you, Michael. So we have gotten a few questions. There were a couple that were emailed in, and as well as there are a couple in the Q&A here. So I'm going to go through those too, but then we can open up and people can raise their hands or get mute. So one of the questions that I got online was whether these technologies are accessible to somebody who's in a condo as opposed to a home. And I don't know, Jeremy, if you want to comment on that. Can't hear you.
I muted on my headset too.
There you go.
Yes. So yes, it depends, of course, on what your condo association's policy is as far as making improvements to common spaces. All of these technologies will require, I don't know, depending on what sort of building you live in. If you're in a 3-decker and you happen to have roof rights, then you could probably install a solar hot water system without any issue. But installing any of these systems, you'll have, an air source heat pump system will require that you drill a hole in the side of the wall, usually a 3-inch hole, so not very, not particularly disruptive. But depending on what the policies are of your association, you may need to get approval to do so. Mass saves programs are available to any 1 to 4 unit buildings. So that encompasses most of the the 3-decker type condo situations that are in the greater Boston area. In larger buildings, it can also be possible. There are plenty of larger multifamily buildings that have installed ductless air source heat pumps in particular, but it just entirely depends on sorting things out with your neighbors. I have 2 colleagues who live in 3-deckers and in condo associations of of 2 and 3 owners, and they were able to get permission to install ductless heat pumps.
Great, thank you. Then we also had a question from James Donahue in the audience here about, are there issues in the drilling for ground source heat pumps in an environment with significant rocks and ledge as is common in Melrose? I'll probably throw that over to you, Jeremy, but I am going to comment that I've gotten estimates to do it, and their basic requirement was that the bedrock be between 5 and 30 feet. They actually want there to be rock because otherwise the hole will collapse on itself. So yeah. But you could give us a more technical perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, bedrock is actually what you want to hit eventually. And I think, as Susan was saying, a longer distance to getting to bedrock is actually more challenging and more expensive because you have to install steel casing as you go down before you hit bedrock to make sure that the hole doesn't, as Susan was saying, the hole doesn't collapse. You know, think about some of the places that are known for their bedrock. Manhattan, a cathedral there installed geothermal heat pumps about 3 years ago with 1,500 foot boreholes. So entirely possible to do so. You know, there's a lot of ground source heat pumps installed in New Hampshire with a lot of granite there as well. So not at all an impediment, and you know, to be expected in the typical vertical drilling process. The rockiness does mean that I didn't talk about this, but if you had a large lot, you could install a horizontal system, but those typically are not installed in mass, in part because of that can pose some challenges for excavation as opposed to drilling.
Probably not for Melrose lot sizes for the most
Nope.
part, I would say.
not anywhere, most places east of the 495, I would think.
Yeah. And then also on heat pumps, there's another question from Jim Garrett. Is there potential for multiple households to go in together on ground source heat pumps?
Potentially, yes. Like there could be some efficiencies in economies of scale from having, you know, if you had, you know, two neighbors and you're, you know, willing to, you know, able to drill boreholes on, you know, each side of the property and have those feed into individual heat pumps in your home. There are plenty of examples of campus style installations, even for larger buildings where this happens. It's not very common, of course, since you have to sort of get everything sorted out with your neighbor and have everyone on the same page about, you know, what's running where and such. But there can be some economies of scale. Just an example, I know, for example, Roxbury Community College in Boston installed hundreds of boreholes as part of resurfacing a large parking lot, and those boreholes all serve, I think, 3 or 4 different buildings on the campus.
Okay, great. And then we have a couple of questions for Michael Rigney. If you were willing to share what your total cost was before the rebates and tax credits and how long the installation took, how invasive was it?
Yeah. Before installations and everything, it was over 60. So just given, and our house isn't even that big, but that's what it came out to. We needed 3 holes, and there were 2 units inside. I think it was 6 tons total, 5 or 6, 6 or either 7 tons total. And so that's what it was before rebates. So ballpark. You also do have to budget for like replanting the grass in your yard afterwards, you know, and having that done. So that's, and then usually the contractors who do the project won't do that. It's just sort of outside their expertise. So that's an additional thing. From start to finish was probably in different stages was probably 6 or 7 weeks. So from when the drilling started to when like the system was commissioned.
And in terms of the internal work, how invasive was that, aside from the effect on the lawn?
Yeah, not that invasive at all. You know, and it's an old house, and like they had to get a unit up like some stairs into a really tough crawl space, and that all went fine. That was fine, and it's a really difficult, tight space.
All right, then we also have a question. This is for all of the residents, whether you know what your sort of return on investment, what's your payback period? Have you done any of that sort of calculation?
I've got the screen on, so I'll go. I had aspirations to do that, and we have young kids, and so I didn't keep up the spreadsheet. But then the other thing that we did was we chose to make our electricity 100% green at the same time. So we sort of made the analysis harder by changing the cost of our electricity too. So that kind of made the analysis harder. But the bottom line is I haven't kept up on that.
Okay, great. How about Steve Manuel? Do you have a sort of payback period or?
Sure, yeah, I can talk about that. So the system or the 2 systems together cost $25,000. And that was split, I think, about $9,500 for the small system and around 16 for the larger system. And I guess, and the other piece of it is the solar was already there, so we kind of viewed that as a separate investment. So in a sense, you know, the majority of the electricity supply for the heat pumps was kind of free, looking at it that way. You know, we kind of viewed the heat pumps as adding some value to the house. You know, we didn't have any kind of air conditioning before. We mainly used fans and occasionally used a window air conditioner that didn't accomplish very much. So that was a big improvement to the house, as was just the level of comfort, you know, in the heating season compared to the steam system. So, you know, I kind of view the project as maybe adding, say, 10,000 to the value of the house, which leaves about 15,000 to pay for. And we save about 500 gallons of oil a year. So at the time we were thinking about all this, we were thinking in terms of $3 oil. So that's about $1,500 or around a 10-year payback. So, you know, that's one way to look at it. The most pessimistic way today would be to call it $2 oil, and you know, so that'd be $1,000 a year, you know, over the entire cost of 25,000. So that's more like 25 years. So that's kind of the range depending on how you wish to look at it. And today, I think we would choose at least one of the systems, you know, slightly different in order to qualify for the alternative energy credits. But the main incentive we used was the 0% heat loan, so that spread the cost over 7 years, which you know, makes it pretty doable.
Great. And there was another question in the chat that I'll just ask you. So it was, if you have an air source heat pump, do you still need to use an old system such as gas or oil to heat your home?
No, we did leave it in place as a backup, but in practice we haven't used it. And I think, you know, in sometime, hopefully not too far from now, we'll take out the old system. I think at a minimum, we'd like to get rid of the oil tank because that's a liability to have sitting there in the basement. So, you know, separately, we had a gas fireplace installed, so that can function as at least a partial backup as well. But yeah, in our case, we were able to select the systems to match up to the full heating load. So we've been able to do all the heating that way.
Great, thank you. And maybe I
I
can
just
go
wanna-
back to, oh, sorry. Oh, you
I
go
just want
ahead.
to add briefly to that point. You know, there are a lot of different ways that you can install an air source heat pump in conjunction with an existing system. You know, not everybody is interested in necessarily converting their whole home to it. They may want to just zone a couple parts of the home where you're using the living space or, you know, master bedroom or something like that. Or you can, if you have a furnace, you may be able to install it in what's called a dual fuel system to switch between the furnace and the heat pump, depending on which is more cost effective. So a lot of different options that are available. A lot of folks who, you know, as Steve has, you know, use their heat pump for as a primary source of heating, may just leave the backup in place in case there are any issues with you know, that arise. So very flexible.
Susan, should we give you the payback on the solar hot water?
Yeah, I was just going to go to you. So yes, please do.
Yeah, so where we ended up paying just $1,800 with all of the incentives, after all the incentives, and we're looking at about 100 gallons a year in oil. So whether it's $200 to $300 or more, that would be a 5 to 6 year payback. So it's pretty good payback. I think the next owner of this house will benefit far more than we did.
If we ever move.
We're not going to be living.
And
Hey, Susan, could I follow up just a little bit more, actually?
let me just ask one more question about the solar hot water, because someone was just asking, do you have any issues taking long showers and having hot water?
None.
Okay.
Oh, no,
All right.
Not at all.
no. So one of the differences with the solar hot water is you're dealing with a much larger tank. So there's actually 2 tanks within. When the oil is heating up the hot water, it has a smaller tank that it works with. With solar hot water, it's more than double the amount. So it heats up a much larger amount of hot water. So it's actually you could be running it quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, the only time, there have been probably a handful of times when we felt, I'd be doing dishes or something and you'd feel the water starting to be maybe not, really hot. But as I say, literally that would have to be after like 4 or 5 days of gloom. But on a sunny day, even a sunny cold day, the thing, you go down and look at it and it's humming and gets very hot. So no,
the collector will go above 200 degrees on the roof at times. So there's a solar collector with that antifreeze that goes through it, and you can monitor the activity. So that fluid is easily above 170 degrees. So it's actually too hot. It has to regulate it lower because we don't want the hot water to be anything more than I think 130 actually. So when it's cranking, it's there, and like I say, it will last for several days even if it's cloudy.
Great, thank you. All right, and Michael, what did you want to share with us?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to one of my comments and sort of do the payback math in a somewhat different way because I haven't tracked it in a spreadsheet, but it illustrates the point I think that I was making before. So the price is high, but just to do sort of representative math, start with $60,000, which is our house. A lot of projects are a lot cheaper, and just that's how we got multiple quotes, and they were all in the same range. So, but if you take $60,000 and you take roughly $20,000 off that for the federal tax credit, now you're down to 40. At the time we did it, the state Mass CEC was another 20. Now you're down to 20. Now to $20,000. We had to replace our heating system, which was, we got a couple quotes that was going to be, when all was said and done, like high single digit. And we were sitting on an air conditioning system, which was, sort of 2 systems, 2 different, because we had an upper zone and lower zone. And that was pushing 14, 15 years old. And so that's why when my math showed that when the air conditioning system broke, that was the year that you break even. And then, of course, you're able to spread what's out of pocket out over 7 years with the loan. So when you break it down across the different grants and the heating systems you have to pay for if you don't do this, it's really the equipment cost that starts to add up if you need to do both. So I hope that's helpful. Jeremy, and for others, I think the out of pocket costs are very high, and I think there's an opportunity for a short-term loan. For like a bank that provides a short-term loan where they understand how all these cash flows work to make it easier so people don't have to write such big checks.
Yeah. No, that's actually very common. A lot of the installers in the state will offer sort of those 365-day same as cash type loans to just cover the tax credit, so that you don't have to pay out of pocket for what you're going to get back on your taxes later in the year. And then if you don't want to spread it out over 7 years, they offer loans that can go up to 20 years to spread that out even further. There's interest, but lower monthly.
Right. Thank you. And then the other thing we thought about was the longevity of the systems is extraordinary. Because the equipment is indoor, it lasts 20 plus years, and then the boreholes themselves, like, they'll be here after I'm gone, not from the house, like after I'm gone. So that's nice.
Same here.
We're getting a lot of questions here in the Q&A. So since we were talking about heat loans, there's a question, are the Mass Save loans available for a heat exchange system if we have used it previously for installing a gas heating system?
If you used the heat loan previously, you're only able to get one heat loan, unfortunately.
Okay, so only one heat loan ever. Okay.
Yes. But for again, ground source, there are installers that offer financing typically through Enerbank to do those loans, and then most manufacturers will offer some financing as well. You're not going to get 0%, over 7 years, but they are offered.
And let's see.
I'm gonna interrupt real quick.
Yeah.
Be sure to check the chat, everybody. I put in some good resources and information in the chat. You just need to press on the arrow. Thanks.
Okay, and then we had a question about air source systems, about how big is a zone, how many square feet, or what would normally be covered by one unit, and what kind of capacity you need in your electrical panel for that?
Yeah, so it depends on a number of factors. If you have an open concept space, it depends. The ductless air handlers, you may be able to have. I, for example, live in an open living kitchen dining space, and I probably could get a single unit to cover that all as one zone. Individual rooms can be a little trickier. You can put units in every room, but it's not always ideal to do so just because the cost goes up a lot. So certainly where there are rooms where you can leave the doors open, that's a good opportunity for, if you wanted to place a unit in the hallway and have the heated or cooled air move between spaces. The range on how far, heat will move from an individual ductless unit varies by manufacturer and model, but, it can be roughly, 30 to 50 feet or more, depending on how well insulated your home is, which is another factor. If you have a well insulated home, there are homes that have been built, that are, very efficient, very tightly and done, that only have 2 units, and one on the first floor, one on the second floor, providing all the heating and cooling to the home. Others, in homes that are draftier, where it's very difficult to add more insulation, could have, 5 to 8 zones, but it really depends on your comfort. You can also, if you have existing ductwork or you are able to install a short run of ductwork, you could, for example, have 2 bedrooms and a bathroom all connected with a short run of ductwork and have a single, what's called a mini ducted unit, heating and cooling all of those rooms as a single zone. So a lot of ways to get creative with it, depending on what's the layout of your home.
We had a question about the air source heat pumps and the ductless systems and what that looks like on the outside of a house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they're not necessarily ducts on the outside of the house. It's refrigerant piping and the condensate drain, and those are typically wrapped up in sort of like a plastic covering. Often to me, when if at a quick glance, looks like a drain, a drain from the roof. It can come in different colors. You can paint over them. I've heard of jobs where they've been done on, brick buildings in Boston, where they've, the homeowner or the installer has painted it to match the exterior to reduce the aesthetic impact. So they don't interact directly with water drains. You would have them separate from them, and you'd have lines running to individual units. You can do it on the exterior of the home, or depending on the layout of the home, you could potentially do it on the interior as well.
Okay, and we also had a question for Michael about whether there was any pushback from the neighbors or concern about the neighbors when he installed the ground source system.
They enjoyed watching the drilling. And the drill rig was as tall as the house, so it was big. And like lots of folks coming by and being like, are you installing geothermal, or are you drilling a water well? So there was a lot of curiosity. There's no pushback. some of the neighbors, people express a lot of curiosity and interest. So I think it's just not a technology that's well understood, which is why this program's so great.
Sorry, I missed the second part to that question, which is what capacity electric panel is needed. For if you're doing 1 or 2 zones, typically depending on how much space you have on your current panel, you may be able to get away with it if you have 100 amp service. If you do want to go to a whole home heating solution, most homes, depending on how many appliances you already have, will need 200 amp service. So an electrical service upgrade from 100 to 200 amps is often one of the challenges that people will face in going with an electric heating system.
All right.
I can comment on that also if you like.
Sure.
We also upgraded from a 100 amp to a 200 amp service, but that was actually done when we had the solar PV installed, and so we knew we were going to do heat pumps. So between the heat pumps and the solar, quite a few extra circuit locations were needed and the added capacity. But it was pretty cost effective to have the panel and the service upgraded as part of the solar project, since they were doing so much wiring anyway.
Great. I think I've gotten all the Q&A, I think. Martha, did you want to open it up for people to unmute themselves and ask a question or raise a hand?
There's still maybe a couple more.
Oh, did I miss one?
Let's see. How do we get our home assessed for the feasibility of solar hot water? Is it sufficient to get morning sun only? Typically, you'll want 5 hours of direct sunlight to be able to have a system that will generate enough hot water. So it depends. You'll have some people who will have the installer can come out or do a remote assessment using Google Earth and can give you a sense of whether it will generate enough to be worthwhile.
So there was a question of, is there a concern of pipes freezing if the furnace isn't running on cold days? So how does that affect like your basement heating if you're going to one of these systems? What do you do about it?
Yeah, if you're entirely removing your system, you may want to consider doing some insulation of the basement, which you can do through the Mass Save program. Generally, I haven't heard of just removing an existing furnace causing the basement to freeze, but if that's the case, then you may really want to look into doing some air sealing along the rim joists and such to help with not having things freeze up there during a polar vortex.
Yeah, I could speak to that a little bit also. When we've started using our air source heat pumps, actually when we first started them up was at the beginning of January 2.5 years ago, which was probably the coldest 2 weeks that we've had in 20 years around here. So that was an interesting time to test new heat pumps. But anyway, we did have one section of our basement that was getting pretty cold, namely some water pipes were running through a small crawl space area to some kitchen plumbing. So we did have to insulate all the way around the rim joist and actually add some board insulation on the inside of the block walls in that area. So that got that area, up into the 40s, on the, something like a 10-degree day instead of down into the 30s, which wasn't so good. But overall, the basement is noticeably colder. It probably gets, in the coldest weather, it gets down to maybe the upper 40s, where it previously was, again, in the coldest weather, maybe in the mid 50s. So it does make a difference when you don't have a steam system running in the basement anymore. However, we haven't yet insulated the rest of the basement, and that's a something we'd like to do in the future. And I think that would, you know, be one thing that would make me that much more comfortable about getting rid of the backup steam system entirely.
Great, thank you. Ooh. I mute. So I think we're going to wrap this up. We did have a last question about next steps and are we waiting for installers and all. So I just want to note, so where we are, we're in the process. There is an RFP out for installers for each of the technologies that we will be getting responses back in early June, and the installers should be chosen by mid-June. In the meantime, you can already sign up at HeatSmartMelrose.org. There's a sign up, and you'll be contacted when installers are chosen. You'll get updates, etc. If you sign up there, so you'll be on our list. Someone asked about, should we be waiting for the installers to be selected? You know, these will be installers that will be vetted through a process with city volunteers and Cadmus, and we're going to get sort of group pricing transparency in terms of the pricing. You're obviously welcome to get other installer estimates as well, but I think it probably is worth, you know, seeing, talking to our installers too. It'll be within a month they should be selected. And so that's, anything else, Martha?
I think that's it. Lisa, did you have anything to add?
No, I just unmuted myself so I could say thank you and for doing this. And nice
So thank you, everybody. And if you have more questions, if I will go through and see if I missed any questions and email you if I did, but also you can email us at HeatSmartMelrose@gmail.com. And again, the website's HeatSmartMelrose.org. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Michael and Lisa and Steve for telling us about your experience.